All right, so hey folks, we have about 20 minutes to get through this, so let's get through it as much of it as we can. So a couple of things that I thought about in terms of training. We end up going through the workshop. The workshop is taking you in a specific order. It's fine. One thing that I want you to think about is that once you're done with the workshop and you understand what the concepts are, if you had to go back and recreate an application like this, where would you start? And it's a good question, because there's going to be a lot of sort of moving parts that you can have. So the way that I am going to approach it is that if we look at this, we can start either by sort of looking at the Express app and getting some routes to work, okay? Or we could start out with our seed file and end up getting our models to end up building by loading the seed file. There's a couple of different ways that you can end up doing that, or we can end up writing some tests so that we could have some sort of documentation for what our models should do, and we could start out by testing out our models, because obviously we need to have our models set before we end up looking at our application, and then we could go in and test out our application. So that's what I'm going to do. Some sort of, no tests that are really all that complicated. What I want to do here is let's actually pop up this workshop for a second. So again, there's going to be 3 phases of the workshop. This is going to be our first one, our static UI. And the only reason I'm actually pulling this up is that I want to get access to the seed file that we have here, which we'll end up using in a little bit. Okay. So if you're going to start out by writing a test, let's actually just sort of get things rolling a little bit. Let me pop up this console here. One thing that you really can't go wrong with when you're setting up your project is to just do a npm init. And we could just take the default settings for now, okay? And within our package JSON file, we could go in, and right now we have this test here. If we were to just say npm test, again, we end up getting this echo thing printing out, just giving us a placeholder for this. And the place we're going to find Mocha is going to be in / node modules, and it's Mocha bin Mocha. Okay? And this is what we're going to run our test. We could do this right in the console as well. If I went over here and I said / well, this actually isn't going to work because we don't have Mocha installed yet, but that's what we're going to end up looking to do. So let's actually install a couple of things here. We're going to install Mocha, and we're going to install Chai, and we're going to save this as a development dependency. You ever try to save something without having your package JSON file? It won't actually end up putting it in the node modules folder, so be aware of. So now when I end up doing this, if I went back here, I could see my package file has changed. And if just from the command line, if I wanted to go in here and say node modules, Mocha, bin Mocha, not node module, node modules, okay? I get this error, and the reason why I get this error is that by default, Mocha is going to be looking for your files in a directory called test, and it can't find that directory. So again, just to, if I go in here and run this again, I'll find that it passed, but there aren't any tests that are here. And so I'm going to build this out from here. Get a couple of tests in, get a couple of tests for our simple routes, actually without ever going in at the beginning and even loading up anything inside of a browser, okay? So you're going to get some continuous feedback on this without doing a lot of refreshing. In fact, one of the things that we could do is we could say nodemon, and we could go in here and run this same command. Now, in fact, it'll end up watching for any files that we have here. And since we're doing it here, why don't we just make our lives a little bit easier and put this code in our test file. So this is going to be nodemon, node not module, but modules. And now if we went back here and we said npm test, this is going to be watching us here, okay? Or we're watching these files. So let's actually start this out. And let's actually get an idea of what we're going to be doing here. We can find out a lot of information from the seed file. So if we go up and grab the seed, things we could do if we want to get this file, we could take this file and we could actually go to our console and we could specify git.clone, and by default it would actually put that file inside of a folder with that number at the end, and you can determine what folder you want this to be in by going over here and putting in seed. That's something you can do with Git. If you're cloning something, it'll put it in that sort of default folder, okay? But you could specify where you want it to go. So now if I do this, and I've got this seed file here. There's also some other files in here that are related to Git that I probably just want to get rid of. It'll sort of think that you have a Git project within a Git project, which I really don't want. So if I just look at this, I can see I've got this Git folder in here. Let me just remove that. And while I'm at it, actually go over here and start our Git. This is really kind of helpful because if you have things working, okay, and you could say, hey, look, I'm going to commit them to even my local Git repository. If you screw something up later on, you could always undo it and check it out. Check it out, or you could actually create another branch to test something out. But I'm going to go over here and just initialize this. Now I have a Git repository. Again, we've done absolutely nothing with our project yet, but let's take a look at our seed file. Okay, so one of the things that I went over previously on another lecture when you guys were working remotely was the whole idea of what this schema would end up looking like, and the idea that the sort of wrinkle in terms is that we were going to be dealing with the nested schema. So what we can do here for starters is maybe take a couple of these objects and write a test and see in fact if we could go and create these objects and we can end up interacting with our database. So let's go up here and let's grab a couple of these things here. I'm going to go to my models test here. Let's say this is going to be models spec.js. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to do a describe. I'm going to describe my models. And sort of as a good starting point, I'm going to expect that I'm going to have a model for hotel, I'm going to have a model for restaurant, and I'm going to have a model for activity. So let's say that given expectations, hotel exists, just a starting point. And we'll say expect hotel, this is Mocha, which is my assertion library, expect hotel to be okay. And on the same token, I'm going to expect restaurant to be okay. And I'm also going to expect that we have an activity, which is okay. Again, just sort of getting things set up, a little bit out of code at a time, okay? Opting not to really go the browser route at this point to get a little bit more feedback here. If I go back here and this test gets picked up on, I can see, first of all, I don't have anything here. I don't have an expectation library here. I actually do, but I always need to bring in expect, and I'm going to ask Shive's library. I'm going to use their expect object. So if I go back here, I get another error that it doesn't know that these things exist. What I'm looking to do here is that I want to get my models. And I want my models to come from, now, instead of actually having my files in a models folder, I like to put them in a DB folder because I like to do more than just interact with the models. I also like to be in control of connecting to the database and knowing when I'm connected. So just as one other to get deeper, if I do this, what I'm looking to have is that I want to be able to go to my DB and I want to get the models property. Again, every time that I do this, there's different errors that I'm going to run into that it can't find that. That's fine. You could do this one step at a time if you want. I'm going to add this DB folder. I'm going to add index.js to it, in which case I'm back to my other error because it was able to find, require this. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into this file and I'm going to start specifying my models that I'm going to end up exporting. Okay? I can get my test to pass, by the way, by just saying module.exports equals models. If I went down here and I said hotel is some object, restaurant, some object, activity is some object. If I just did that, it should get my test to pass. Let's just take a look. They're not passing because I'm missing one step here to say hotel equals models hotel. Now I should get one test that ends up passing, two other ones should fail. And I'm going to do the same thing with restaurant and activity. Okay? So at this point, these tests should end up passing. Okay. Now, what I want to have happen here is that I also would like to go and actually seed my database with a little bit of data, okay? But before I do it, one of the things that I could do here is go into my index file and create a variable for hotel, not yet done yet, but restaurant and activity. And we know what we're going to end up needing Mongoose, right? So let me actually go in here and say require Mongoose. I know that this is going to have to be installed, so let's install it. Right, and this is not going to be a this is going to be a dependency that we're going to need. So I'm going to say npm install Mongoose save. And so I've got Mongoose here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these out one at a time here to say that I'm going to have a hotel schema. And this is going to be mongoose.schema, some object. I'll just say name string for the moment. And so my hotel is going to be a Mongoose model hotel, and this is going to be my hotel schema. And I'll do the same thing here, even though we're not going to test it out right off the bat. I'll do the same thing with my restaurant and activity. So this is going to be here's my hotel. Let's make this my in uppercase for the models. So this is going to be restaurant with restaurant schema. And this is going to be my activity. And this is going to be my activity model. And I also expect this is going to be here. I've got my three models, right, where creating these things, your schema, and then your model, in which case I'm going to then end up exporting them. Okay. So this should not end up breaking anything here. Now, in order for usually what you end up doing for model specs is that you end up seeding some data. So for instance, let's say that I'm expecting to seed my data here. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, again, just sort of keeping this pretty simple, I'll say it actually describe, and we'll say hotels. And I'm just going to keep things simple and just seed one hotel. And so I'm going to have an expectation here. Doesn't exist yet. I'll say the first hotel is, I think, Andaz or something like that. But here's my test. Doesn't exist. And I'll say, what do I expect? I expect this hotel, its name, to equal Andaz. And right now we have all kinds of problems here because that doesn't yet exist. Okay? So what I'm hoping to do here is going to be for each. Go in here and actually grab my hotel. So I expect to be able to do something like hotel.find, getting all the hotels. Then I'm going to have a collection of hotels. And outside of this, I'm going to create this variable for hotel. Once I get inside here, I'll say hotel equals hotel 0. Again, I only expect in my seed data here to just have one hotel. And then when I'm done here, I'm going to specify done because this is asynchronous. Now, this is not going to work. And part of the reason why it can't work is that I really can't do hotel.find because I really have no way of connecting to my database. So what I'm going to do here, just sort of building this out a little bit, I'm going to, before any of my tests run, I'm going to create this seed file that we have here in the seed folder. This is really sort of all of our data, okay? But to test things out, I don't need all that data. I just need a little bit of data here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have another seed file.
And I'm going to get it by requiring /seed. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go up here, put a done in here, and say seed, then function done. So it sure feels like my seed file, my seed export is going to return a promise that I could call then on, right? And there would be all kinds of errors popping up here because it can't even find this module, okay? So let's go in and get that module to work with here. Because I'm going to go and create this seed file. And so I'm going to say module.exports, and this is going to be a function that I'm going to call. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring in my, make this bigger. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring in my DB file. And again, one of the things that I like to do is I like to be able to connect to the database and know when I'm connected, okay? So one thing that I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to say DB equals require. And again, I need to go up one level, /DB. Right? My models would be DB models. And what I'm hoping to do is to say, hey, look, DB, I want to connect. And then once we get into here, I'm going to want to do a couple of different things here, but just to keep things simple, let's take my hotel and we'll say this is going to be a models hotel. Again, this is the big model, and I'll return from this and say hotel.create, and we'll say name Mendez Hotel. Right, that could be the simplest thing that we're going to do here. Again, this isn't going to work because we don't have any connect method. So the connect is something that I've spoken to you guys about. It's pretty easy to implement. We've done it a couple of times already. The other thing that I want to do is that instead of actually hard coding the database connection, okay, let's set this up so that when we're testing things, then when we're running our application. So let's actually go in and let's implement this code here. We don't have any connect. Let's implement it. And what we're going to do here is that we're going to specify here, we're going to keep something internally in here. And this is going to be a promise, okay? Meaning that if in fact we've attempted to connect, right, or we've connected, we want to just end up returning that. And so simply if I go in here and I say, hey, look, if in fact, if what we're going to end up doing is we're going to want to just return that connection, right? So we end up going over here. We could specify if you have that connection, simply return it. We don't expect to have it right off the bat. If we don't, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new promise. We're going to use the Bluebird library, so we'll install that. This ends up getting passed 2 methods for resolving and rejecting promises. And what we're going to do here is we're going to connect to Mongoose. So we're going to say, hey, Mongoose, we want to connect. Where do we want to connect to you? Process, environment, connection. So Mongoose gives us the ability to pass in a callback function here, which we're going to do. And in fact, if we're able to connect successfully, okay, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to resolve. I don't expect there to be a problem here, but here's my connection, in which case I'm going to return my connection. Again, when I call connect, and I can call it multiple times, it only ends up creating one connection. This is really called a lazy loading of the connection. When I call it for the first time, it sees if it exists. If it doesn't exist, it ends up creating it, and it ends up returning that object. So one thing that I would like to do here is I would like to modify my package.json file, and let's give this, so when we call this, let's pass this in. This is going to be MongoDB localhost. We could call this whatever we want. Let's call it TP. I have a bunch of these in here already, so let's call it immersive. Let's call it immersive test. That's what my database is. And then I'm going to have to come back over here. Let me kill this. Let me call it again. And let's actually just put a couple of other things in here. We're going to need Bluebird. It's not going to be a dev dependency, so we'll save it. And let's go back to our DB file here, and we'll just bring that in up here. Promise equals require Bluebird.
Hey, Eric, sorry. The line that says con equals and then the connection string specified for con equals?
So this is, if you want to end up passing environment variables in to node, you can do it by putting it before the node command. And so you could pass in multiple environment variables. This is just the way that environment variables end up getting into node when you're running something off the command line, which is what we're doing here, before.
Okay, and it's space separated?
They're space separated,
Okay.
correct. No, we can call it whatever we want to, whatever you want to call it, okay? And in fact, let's actually do something else. Let's just go in here just to be a little on the safe side. Let's say, if not, process, environment, connection, let's not bother doing anything at all here. Something along those lines if someone didn't end up providing it. Once we end up having this in here, we should be able to go to our npm test. So db connect is not a function. Is that true? Yeah, I put it in the wrong spot. My mistake. So it goes right here. Right, these two things are side by side. Let's try this one more time. Okay, cannot read property then of undefined. Let's take a look at our test file here. So we've got our test. We've got our seed function. And let's just make sure in our seed function, yeah, so our problem here is that we need to return this, right? So this is going to be this chain promise that's seeding our database. We're connected to our database. After we're connected to our database, so now if we end up doing that again, whenever you're dealing with promises, you're going to have to make sure that you return the promise. And let's test this out one more time. And we get this to pass, right? So we've sort of got a little bit of this working as well. Let's just test one other thing out here. When we end up seeding our database, let's actually just put in one more simple test, and then we'll do a little bit of copying and pasting to get moving. But let's actually just write one more test here. So we expect this hotel. Let's do one other thing here. Let's put in hotels, because we expect every time that we have one hotel. So let's go in here and specify. I'm going to switch this up a little bit. And I'm going to say hotels equals hotels. And we expect to only have one. But let's actually go in here, the first hotel. Let's say there is one hotel. So we'll say hotels length equal 1. And this fails because we've actually got a bunch of hotels already. One of the things we want to do is that every time that we go to seed things, we want to clear things out so that before we end up creating the hotels, let's return hotel remove. Now we're passing, okay? So let's do the same sort of thing, just a very simple test where we could describe hotels. We'll go over here. And let's say we're going to describe restaurants. Maybe even be able to reuse this. We'll say items, item. We'll say this is going to be restaurant. We'll say item equals items 0. Just doing this so I could get a quick copy and paste here. And this is going to be items equals items. And we expect here first restaurant is, we'll figure that out in a second. We'll say item.name, and for starters, we'll just say foo, there is 1, items.length to equal 1. So one thing we're going to want to do here, if we want to get this to pass, is we want to be able to go up here and also bring in our other model, right? So we have our model for our restaurant. Restaurant find. And let's see what we'll do. We go into our seed file, and we'll end up actually replacing this with more meaningful data. But just to, we could do a promise.all if we want to, but just to get things moving, let's say restaurant, we're going to remove those. And we'll say restaurant.create. And this is going to be, and if we run this, restaurant is not defined, and it's not defined because we just need to bring it in here. So this is going to be restaurant, and this is going to be models.restaurant. So now this passes. Let's do one more pass. We know what we're going to have to do here, so let's actually do it right off the bat. You can comment it out. You always want to make sure you have a failing test before you have a passing test. Let's go over here. Again, once you get your test to pass, you can always go in and you can end up refactoring things. We could look here and say, hey, look, why don't we remove all those collections with one promise.all? Could eventually end up doing that. But here we're going to have activity remove. and we'll say activity create. And this is going to be, we'll call this bar. And so now we've got our activity and our activity. And if we end up going back to our test itself, let's go in. This is going to be a little bit easier to copy and paste. Here's our restaurants. We'll go over here. And this is going to be for our activities. And the only difference here is this is going to be activity.find. And the first one, expect it to be bar. Let's get it to fail first. We go and run this. Right, we expected, we have here that we're looking for foo. We really should be looking for bar. Okay, so now we've got 3 tests. We've got a place to test out our models, okay? We haven't opened up a web browser. We haven't done anything with Express. We're just pure using the models. At the same time, we have a nice class that allows us to connect to the database, which we're going to be able to use for our application, okay? Now let's actually go in and set up the models the way that we know the model should end up being set up. So let's actually use some data from our seed file here. I'm going to grab this guy here. I'm going to go into my seed file. I'll say hotel equals this. One thing that I mentioned that we're going to end up changing here is that we have the ability to not have these nested schemas. Excuse me, we have the ability to have a nested schema without having a nested collection, okay? Again, this is something that's new since the workshop is done. So what I'm going to end up doing here is that this is going to be my hotel that I'm going to create. So I'm going to go over here and say create hotel. And I'm going to run my test. Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, good, good, good. Okay, so what we're going to do, what I'm going to end up doing here is that, first of all, I've got a problem here because I have no place. Okay, and so I'm going to get my test to pass a little bit at a time by specifying, hey, look, there is a place, and place is models.place. And we know we're going to need this for our other seed file anyway. So I'm going to go back to my file here. And before any of these, I'm going to create my place schema. The place schema is going to be a mongoose schema. I'm going to fill this in a little bit later, okay? And I'm actually going to create a place model by saying place equals mongoose model place schema. And the way that this is going to end up getting structured is that this is going to be embedded, so that for each of these, I'm going to have a place, which is going to be a place schema. That's what's defining what that place is. And I'll do the same thing for the restaurants, and I'll do the same thing for the activities. And I'm just going to have to make sure that I end up exporting my place as place. And if I go back here, this should not pass anymore because it's actually and as Wall Street. So let's fix our test. This is going to be up here. Hotel exists. And this is going to be and as Wall Street. And now this should end up passing. But what I really want to test out here is if I go back here and I look at my seed file, one of the things I want to find out here is that a place has a city, okay? So in my test here, I'm also going to want to determine that I expect hotel.place.city to equal New York, which it won't. Okay, expected undefined to equal New York. So I'm going to go in here just a little bit at a time, looking. One of the things I could do here is actually grab my seed data. I'll get rid of this in a second. Let me just copy this. Let me go over to my index file, and let me go over to my place schema. So for my place schema, I'm going to need an address, which is going to be a string. I'm going to need a city, which is going to be a string. That should be enough to get my test passed. I'm going to need a state, which needs to be a string. And I'm going to need a phone, also a string. And I'm going to need a location, which is going to be an array of numbers. Right? Looks like 2 numbers to me. Let me go back and get rid of this. Now I'm sort of building up, again, without even going in and opening up my Mongo console at all, right? We could probably go in here, and this ends up passing, okay? While we're doing it, let's actually go in and start setting up the schema for our other models, and sort of, writing these tests out for everything, which you can do in a real-world application. We do have the framework there if we want to add to it. So let's go in and actually look at the schema for our seed again here. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go over here. A little bit at a time here. So we have our name. We have our place. We're going to have num stars, which is a number. We're going to have amenities, which is going to be a string. And let's just make sure that that passes as well. Okay, good. Nothing broke. Let's do the same thing. I'm going to grab from my seed file, and I'm going to grab a restaurant. And I'll go over here, and in my models file, I'm going to sort of focus on this for a little bit. We've already got our place, but for a restaurant, not only does it have a name, it has a cuisine. How do you pronounce that? Cuisine? My dad says cuisine. Yeah. From Jersey, what I tell you. So this is going to be a string.
Hey, Eric, when you define an array of numbers, is it also legit to say that's right?
No.
No?
No, because you want to be more specific as to what it is.
It would have worked, but not as well as it should have, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically you're not enforcing your model. You could put anything in there if you just put an array. So people did that.
Type, right? Is there a type?
Like specifying an array?
Numbers, or?
I don't think so.
You have to do like that.
Yeah.
Right.
So what we're going to do here is we are going to, this should actually be enough. And we'll open up, eventually we'll open up our Mongo database, see that this stuff got seeded properly. But if we do this, this should be enough to break anything for a restaurant schema. Do we have a real restaurant there? Did I copy and paste a real restaurant? Let's do that. I don't think I did. Okay. So let's go over here, and in our, let's grab my restaurant. This is going to be my restaurant. And I'll get rid of this as being an array, which it doesn't have to be. And we'll end up creating this. Again, this will fail my test, but that's fine. We'll just fix the test. Right, so I think I've got a comma here that I shouldn't. Right, so this is going to give me the wrong thing. It's not foo. This is going to be boule. And let's do the same thing with our activities. So here's our seed file for our real data, I would say, at this point. And let's go to we'll start out again with our model. So this is going to have move this down. So for our activity schema, we've got a name, we've got a place. The only other additional thing that we want to have is an age range, which is also a string. Oh, thank you. Catch. And if I end up doing that, let me go back to grab this guy one more time. And go to my seed file. And so this is going to be my restaurant. And we'll get rid of this bracket. Again, it'll end up breaking my test, but that's okay. Let's get rid of this comma. And this is what we're going to create. So this is going to be my restaurant. Go back here. We expect this to fail, right? So let's just copy this. Go back to our test. And we're going to put in our restaurant. And this should end up passing. And we pass. Okay? So at this point, we have our model spec set up. Okay? So one thing we could end up doing here is that just sort of simplistically here, and we've sort of looked at this before, but it's something that I would like you to use. We could use something called super test that's going to allow us to pull in our application, and we could write a pretty simple test. But the test that we'll do is to say, hey, look, when we get to the home page of our application, let's write a test that we expect to find at least, we should be able to see the and as hotel as a starting point, okay? So let's start to set that up, and what we'll end up doing is I'm going to say npm install, and this is going to be super test as promised, save dev. And I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to create a test for my routes. This is going to be fairly simplistic here. So this is going to be route spec.js. And say describe routes. And what do I expect? Describe homepage. And we'll say that the home page has Andes Hotel on it. Now, this doesn't exist yet, but we're going to have some way of doing this that basically says, so the way that super test as promised works is that from in a it block, if you return it, you don't actually even have to pass in a done. So I'm going to say app.get, and I'm going to say slash, and I'm going to expect 200. Okay? Again, my app doesn't even exist yet. If I was to go and run this, okay, app doesn't even exist. The way that I'm going to end up getting my app is I'm going to say app equals require super test as promised. And here, you basically have to pass in an express application. So I'm going to require, it doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to require an app, which is going to be an express application. Okay? Again, run into all kinds of problems here, right? Because app doesn't exist. But now I can actually start creating it. Now it exists. Okay? Doesn't really exist. I don't have anything in it. But let me actually go and start setting it up. I'm going to bring in express. Say my app is equal to express, right? So express exports something that allows me to create an express application. And I'll say module.exports equals I don't have an, okay, you can see I have an app here. It's actually giving me a 404 error. If I went over here, I said app.get, this is going to be my home page. And this is going to be, I could say request.response, next. If that works. So now I've actually got a 200, but let me actually write a quick test over here. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to have a test that will allow me to actually look at the data that's coming back. And so in my test here for the things that I could do is not only expect the 200, but actually get my response back. And say response dot expect response to contain Andes. And it's actually going to be, let me modify a couple of things. I need my expect. And expect is my response, but my response, the text of my response. Yeah, that's going to basically be your response. Now, this is going to pass, but it's not quite really what I want, right? I mean, I want to be able to sort of build this out here and actually send this to a template and actually get the data from my database. If I was to go and do that, my test would fail. Okay? And what I want to do here is now I'm actually going to start building this out. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say models equals require, and this is going to be /db. And this is going to be hotel equals models hotel. This is going to be restaurant equals models.restaurant. And this is going to be activity equals models.activity. And instead of actually sending this out, what I really want to be able to do is to get all of my hotels, all of my restaurants, and all of my activities. And the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to bring in the Bluebird library. And I'm going to say, promise, 3 promises would be hotel.find, activity, restaurant, .find, and activity, .find. Right, so those are going to be my 3 promises. Once I end up getting those promises back, I'm going to have some results. And I'm going to say response.render. I'm going to use index, and here I'm going to want to send this data back. So this is going to be hotels, results, 0. That's how promise.all works. And this is going to be restaurants. This is going to be results 1. And this is going to be activities. And this is going to be results 2. Again, I'm going to have all kinds of errors, which is totally fine. And all of these errors, if I went up here, I could see I've got a problem. Well, I can't read find of undefined. So what is undefined here? Restaurant, activity, hotel.
Activities.
I think it's this. Right, this is my models. The error that I do expect is that it's not going to be able to, I have no view engine specified. So let me actually go in and set up my view engine. Right, again, all under testing this out, npm install, swig, save. And let me actually go in here. And I'm going to go into my app, and I'm going to bring in swig. And what I like to do is right off the bat is to specify swig, set defaults, cache, false. Right, I don't want to caching things. I want to end up seeing these changes. And I'm going to also specify with my app engine, HTML, and the function that I'm going to use to do the rendering is swig.render file. Right, these are all things that you've seen before. The other thing that I want you to see here is that I am writing a few lines of code, but there's no big copying and pasting to make sure that I have all the different modules that are there. This is enough that as you're building this out the first few times, you should be building out copying and pasting anything, okay? You don't have Morgan in there, fine. Add it in later if you want to, okay? It's not that critical right from the beginning to have everything. We don't need method override set up. We don't need body, we're not even using them for this. So if we do this, we're going to say app.use or app.set view engine HTML, at which point we should get another different error message here, right, that I can't find this view. And I'll go into my page, I'll set up views, and this is going to be index.html.
Eric, I'm sorry. When you get a chance, can you go back to your super test? That response object that you got back? I'm just not clear where that came from.
It comes from supertest.
Oh, it's part of super test.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
So the way that supertest ends up working is that you get your the way that supertest ends up working is that you can make a request, and when you end up getting your response, this will be your response that'll have all kinds of things in it. It was in here.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah. Okay.
So what we're going to do here is that if I just wanted to get this to pass, I can go in here and open up my HTML. If I put in and as here, got 500 server error. Let's just make sure. And part of the problem that I have here is that it's actually not looking at those HTML files, which I could end up having it do. All right. So right now, just to get a few more things done a little bit quickly, I'm going to get out of testing mode for the moment. We could always get back to it. And the one that I upload for this in our repository will have some more tests that are built in there. But what I'm going to do is actually go in here, and I'm going to, let's modify our app.js file. Let's think of really what we want to have here. So this is going to end up getting us some data that we could end up using in our views. But really, I really want to have a way of actually starting up our server. So the way that I like to do it is to specify a server file, separate these things out. And we've done this before, so I'm going to have my server file. I'll say HTTP require HTTP. I'm going to also bring in my database, require /db. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say, hey, look, DB connect. Then function. And I'll say connected to DB. Once I'm able to then connect to the DB, I'm going to say server equals HTTP create server. I'm going to create it with, I'm going to require my app. You could create a server with your application, and I'm going to say port equals, I'll say process environment port or 3000. So now I could go over here and I could say server.listen on port. And this takes a callback function if it's actually able to listen. Not list, but listen.
Here,
Yeah.
why do you use the HTTP to create a server instead of just using app.listen? Yeah, I wondered, like, could you do it with just? Yeah, you can. The teaching assistant helped us last time. Okay, you could do. All right. So yeah, he asked us why we did it this way, and I said.
You know, you should tell him it's because your instructor did it this way, because he didn't know the other way to do it. So maybe I should, but it's a good point.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's go over here and we'll say here, once we're able to listen, we'll do console.log, and we'll say listening on port. Let's just put a little ES6 in here, which we can do in Node, and we'll specify that this is going to be our port. So let's actually set up some code to.
You're missing an equals on 7.
Thank you. So now we've got this. And I hate to miss semicolons. Where am I missing them? And no, connect I want to the dot. That's right. Good point. Okay. So what I want to be able to do here is that I want to be able to start this pretty easily. So I've got my package JSON file. So let me go to my package JSON file, and I'm going to add another line here. And this is going to be start. And when I go to start this, I'm going to say connection equals MongoDB local host, and this is going to be TP IM. This is not going to be test. And we'll say nodemon, so we could keep on listening, and we'll say server.js. And if we do this, we could just use 3000, okay? So if I go over here, I should be able to go over here and say npm start. And we're connected to the DB and we're listening on the port. So now if I went over here and I opened up a browser, we don't really have much to look at here, but now we can sort of build this out.
Eric, would you be able to start on the DB from that start script if it wasn't started already also, or no?
Maybe, I don't know, I haven't done that. Maybe you would be able to run a command to start it if it's not started. Problem is you don't want to start it multiple times,
Right.
So yeah.
Some way to check.
Some way to check it that it's running. So what I'm going to do here is let's actually start now. Now that we know that we have our data set up, we have an Express app set up. Let's actually focus on getting at least our drop-down list to end up displaying. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set this up with a couple of files here. I'm going to add a layout file. And so this is going to be HTML. This is going to be head, body, end of HTML. And let's put our body in here. This is going to be block, content, and we'll do an end block. And let's go over here to our index file and say that it extends layout.html. And this is going to be our block. And our end block. And we can go over here and just put something in here. We should also be passing some data to our view. So if we went over here and we said hotels and looked at it as JSON, okay, so if we ended up reloading this here, right, I would see it's not really showing me much of anything here. It's actually not hotel, it's hotels. And this is just an empty array. So what I would like to do is actually, I'm going to copy and paste something here that I did previously. So and this basically is just getting rid of all those brackets. So if I look at my seed file, we go back here. I'll show you in a sec. So this is basically just the seed file that you had before with one modification here. Within this file, I'm actually connecting to the database. So the only difference here is that I'm actually going to connect to the database so I could run this file and I could create the connection. Other than that, it's got my place in here. My models is a little bit different. Everything else is the same. what this should give me the ability to do is to go to my console, and what I should be able to do is to actually seed my data. So let's say that if I went over here and I said node, and under the seed directory, I've got this file. If I run it, it says no connection string applied. So I know the connection string that I'm using is going to be this guy right over here. I go back here and I say connection equals MongoDB localhost BP immersive, and then I run my command node seed Tripplanner seed.js. It'll end up inserting my data the same way you guys probably inserted it. And now if I go back here, I've got all of my hotels. So someone asked where the hotels came from. The hotels are coming from my route, where here are my results for my hotels. Who asked that question?
It's about the pipe to down on it.
Oh, so that's basically just something that you have with a template engine. That's called a filter for a templating engine. What I'm going to do here,
That's something you had to implement, or is that just out of the box?
that's out of the box. So what I'm going to do here, otherwise I think it just treats it as a string. Here it actually prints it out as I think JSON data. What I want to be able to do here, I want to start specifying as just a starting point. I want to have my 3 select objects with their values. So I'm going to have a select object here, another select object here, and just sort of as a starting point, what I would like to be able to do is to say for hotel in hotels. And I would like to go over here and in my select, I want to put an option in here. For the value, I want this to be my hotel's ID. And for the name, I want it to be the hotel.name. If I do that,
What does that do where value versus name? How's that?
I mean, this is just the way that select objects work. So when you end up selecting something with the select object, the value that you get in the option, the underlying value is the ID. HTML that looks like this. And that's incorrect. So that looks wrong, right? My value is not, I don't want it to be an object. So we know that ID is, in fact, underscore ID is an object, but one thing that's kind of neat is that if you just specify ID, you should actually get the ID back, okay? So I want to do this for hotels. I also want to do this for activities. And this is going to be activity ID. And this is going to be activity name. And if we go and run this, so here are my activities. And if I go back up here, I'm going to have my restaurants. And we'll change the order in a second. This is going to be restaurants. And this is going to be restaurant ID. This is going to be restaurant name. Okay. Now let's sort of ask the question here. So this is restaurant instead of restaurants, typo. Okay. Now, so let's ask a few questions here. These things look pretty similar, right? You're doing these select objects for all three of these things. Well, why not? So we could take advantage of having a template engine and include, and we'll say we're going to include a selector. Now, right now, if I went back and I just did this, I'm going to get this error because it can't find that file. So I always do these things one thing at a time, and I add, and let's actually even do this, just because we know that this is a, what would be considered something that's a partial. Let's name it underscore selector. And if I go over here, I'm going to add it. And if I go back here, I'm no longer going to get this error, because selector.html. Right, now what I want to be able to do here is to move this logic in there. So what I would like to be able to do is to move this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this, I'm going to put this in selector just to start out with. This will actually work. That's not what I'm looking for. All right? I now have my 3 drop-down lists. What I really want to be able to do is I want to make this a little bit more generic. Okay? So when I go in here, I'm going to say for item, in items, item.id, item.name. And it's very easy to basically go in here and specify what I want to do is I want to pass this with items equals hotels. Okay? So what that does is that passes this into the template, and now if I reference items inside that template, I'm really referencing the hotels. So if I do that, that allows me to do instead of actually having all this, I could say items is restaurants, and items is activities. Do you guys use partials? Shut up. That's what these are. Basically includes. Did anyone use includes? Thought maybe I'd get a different answer.
We actually moved. We did
obviously you see that you're repeating stuff, right? So this makes things a little bit easier. Now, one thing we could do here is that I'm going to end up wanting to use Bootstrap and flesh this out a little bit. And so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in Bootstrap. A couple of different ways to do this. The way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to use something called Bower. So I think this was also sort of mentioned in the workshop too. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Bower install. And I could actually install Bootstrap. Okay? I'm going to do one other thing first. So I'll do this first, then I'll talk to you a little bit about this. So Bower install Bootstrap. And actually, just to be clear, the same way that you have NPM, you could do Bower init as well. So someone could get all your Bower files if they want to. Same sort of thing. It's not really mandatory for this. It still work. But I'm going to say Bower install. And this is going to be Bootstrap, and I just want to show you something. So here I've got, once I do that, it puts it in a folder called Bower Components, and here's my Bootstrap and my jQuery. If you wanted to control what folder that went in, you could do something like this. Say, I'm going to say Bower RC. I'm going to create a Bower RC file, and I'm going to put a little JSON in here that says directory, and I'm going to put this in my public folder. So by doing that, if I now say Bower install Bootstrap, even though that public folder doesn't yet exist, it'll actually go, and you actually could see where it's installing. If I go back over here, I can see it puts it in the public folder, so you have control over where you want it to go. Okay? You can probably do that from within the Bower command as well, but this will specify if someone grabbed your project, you wouldn't have to put those Bower dependencies in, the same way that if someone grabbed your project, you wouldn't necessarily have to have those node modules in there as long as they had the package JSON file. So I'm going to get rid of this one. And so here's where my Bootstrap is. And in my layout file, I want to have this look a little bit nicer. So before I do that, let's actually go in and set up a static route. So inside of my app here, I'm going to say app.use express static. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say if you end up looking, if you have a route that starts with public, I'm going to say path.join directory name public. And in order to do this, let me actually also just bring in my path. Now again, this should mean go back over here. I should be able to reload this, and it reloads just fine. But what I want to do is I want to use this file now. So if I go back to my layout page, I want to be able to go here and say link. This is going to be a style sheet. And my href is going to be, so again, as long as it starts with public, and I can call this really whatever I want to. If it starts with public, it's going to look within that public folder, because that's what I ended up mounting. So Bootstrap, dist, CSS, Bootstrap, CSS. And this should look not, you don't really see any changes here, but let me actually go in, and it's nice that I just have this in one spot. If I would go back up to my selector, and I'm going to change this, I'm going to say this class is equal to a form control. And you can see that my Bootstrap is there, it's been loaded, and let's actually go in and start modifying a couple of other things here. So with my selectors, which each of my selectors, let me actually put this in a, we could add something here. Let's actually specify that we have a div. We're going to give this a class of form group. And I'm also going to want to give this a label. Now, if I just did this, there's my timer. We started late, so I'm going to take a few more minutes on this. So if we ended up putting in a label here, for instance, if I said label hotels and gave this an ID of hotels, and I went back here, right? This is not going to really make a lot of sense because these are going to be restaurants and activities. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say this is going to be and for my ID, I'm going to call this category as well. And so we'll go up here, and let me go back to my index page. And so this is going to be with category equal to hotels. This is category equals restaurants. And this is category, this is going to be activities. And now that should look a little bit better. And I think I must have my label logic a little bit mixed up here because it should select it. So if you want to use a label and you want it to, the label to actually hit a controller, you could specify for and give it the ID. So I'm going to say this is going to be for category. And so it'll look for an ID. And so what this should allow me to do is that when I click on those labels, it should end up selecting them, in which case going here and finding these restaurants. Now, let's actually just move this over a little bit. We know that we're going to have a map here. So on our index page, let's go over here, and in our content, let's say div class equals row. And we'll go over here and we'll say div class equals column. And I'll say even on a small screen, I want this is going to be where our map is going to be. And I'll put in map to go here. And this will be, let's say, 4. So this should end up moving over to the right. The other thing that probably we want to do is that within our, let's block, and let's wrap it in a container. So now this is going to get wrapped in here a little bit. And we can actually start thinking about our navigation bar. So if we think about what our navigation bar should look like, we're going to have a couple of links on our navigation bar. And let's actually set that up. So we're going to put this on our layout page. And so just to sort of get, we're going to want to have these classes here, and this is going to be nav class equals nav bar. You can see what some of these things end up doing on their own. If we just ended up doing that, you get this empty area. If we say nav bar default, we can see that nav bar is just giving us some room on the top of the page with this background. You can sort of see what these different classes do. In our case, we're going to do nav bar inverse. And so we've got our nav bar inverse. And let's actually go and start filling this out. So what we're going to do is here, we're going to have our nav bar inverse. We're going to give a div here with a class of container. This gives us some margins within our nav bar. And within our nav bar, we're going to have a class, and this is going to be nav bar header. And within this, we could end up putting a link in here. I don't have these memorized. I'm looking at it right here. I always end up copying and pasting from the Bootstrap site. We're going to have nav bar brand. And this is going to have an href of slash. And we could say this is going to be Tripplanner. So now we've got our trip planner. Now the other thing that I want to do here is we want to have a couple of other links that are here. So in order to have these other couple of links that are here, what we can do is outside of the navbar header, it's perfectly legitimate for us to go in and actually put in another nav. So we could say UL class equals nav, and this is going to be navbar nav. And if we went over here, we could put in a list item here. And if we put it in the link here, what do we have? We have an about page. And we have a contact page, right? But now if we went over here, we would end up seeing these other links. Now, these other links don't exist at this point. The other thing, and this is something that I ended up doing on our assignment, is to actually say, hey, look, you know, these things can be, we could make these variables if we want to, okay? For the moment, we'll end up keeping them fixed, but one of the things that we want to do, if we ended up clicking on this, right, we're going to get our page not found error. So if we end up going back here, let's actually create a route for these. So let's go in here, and we'll say app.get about and this is going to be response.render, and this is going to be an about page. Doesn't exist yet. Let's go over here. We'll copy our layout. Out.html. And we'll get rid of all this stuff that's in here to be determined what ends up going in this page. So now, if we went back here, we should see our about page. Now, one thing that we probably want to do is we probably want to pre-select this so you can sort of see what page that you're on. We probably want to do the same thing for contact as well. So if we go back over here, I'm going to copy this. And this is going to be our contact page. Let's make sure I've got these correct. Here's our about. Here's our contact. And this is going to be contact and contact. And let's do something really simple here. Let's actually go in here and add some titles. So we'll put a title here of about. And we'll put a title here of contact. And why don't we actually go over here, and this is going to be a title of home. One of the things we could do here is we could actually use these titles pretty easily by going into our layout and putting in a title tag. And going over here, and we can see now it's using the titles, but we can actually do a little bit of user UI work here by going over here and specifying, hey, look, if title is equal to about, and let's say class equals active, because that's how Bootstrap works. And I'm going to copy this, paste this, and this is going to be contact. So now we can see a. Now we can see selected. We go to Tripplanner, neither of them is selected. The other thing we could do, however you decide you want to implement this, is we could end up, going in here and maybe our about page here, or excuse me, our index page. Maybe we would take these things over here and specify that this is going to be a div, and there's a class called panel default. And we could actually go in here, and this is going to be div, and we'll say class equals, and this is going to be panel heading. We could say choose your trip. And this we could put in div class panel body. If we do that, we'll get a little bit of a panel here. I guess we could set that up. One thing we could also do here is that, if you start to see that things are getting pretty nested here, one thing you might want to do is go over here and say include not selector, but selectors.html. Right, look how much clean that's going to end up reading here. Could save that. Again, if we just loaded this, we're going to get that error message that it can't find it. But if we go over here and we say selectors.html, paste that in here. Back here. Okay. So the last thing that we're going to do here is we're going to bring in our map. So in order an account with Google, and then we have this app file that we're going to end up bringing in here. There's a couple of things that we're going to need. Let's actually, I'm going to copy and paste something here. This is going to be on our index page. So on my index page, I'm going to bring in a script tag. So this was part of the workshop here. Here's my index page. Here's my script tag. Here's my key. This is also, if you do have keys from third parties, one of the things that you're really probably not going to want to do is put them up in your repository. You're probably going to want to set them up as environment variables. And what we're going to do here, let me actually go and put my map in. So for my map, I set it up, I named it map canvas. You guys might have realized that if you don't put a height in there, the map won't end up showing up. The only thing that I'm going to need here, that if I run this, bless you, I'm going to see that it doesn't know what jQuery is, and I'm going to get jQuery pretty easily. I'm going to put it, I'm going to assume I'm going to need it quite a bit. We're going to use it quite a bit today. So I'm going to put a script tag here, and this is going to be my source. And this is going to be, again, this is in the public route. This is public, jQuery, distribution, jQuery.js. And now, a map. All right. The only other thing that I don't have here, but we'll have it in the one that we end up working with this afternoon, is my picker for my days, which is pretty easy to do just with another panel. And I think that that's wrap this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this